There is a town in the very north of Poland. It's called Suwałki, and at first glance, Suwałki is a town like any other. Around 70,000 people live here. There are many historic buildings, lots of cobblestones, and plenty of greenery along the road. But Suwałki is more than that. The town also lends its name to a region with a rich and turbulent history, and that also plays a crucial role in today's political situation. It's the area right above this town.
The place I am right now is also called the
Suwałki Gap.
The word describes the small area between the Russian exclave Kaliningrad on the one side and Belarus on the other side. Right in the middle there is a small part of European Union, Poland and Lithuania, basically like a sandwich between two autocratic states.
The history of this border region has been extremely turbulent over the past decades and centuries. Political systems and entire states have collapsed here, borders have been redrawn and moved back and forth again and again, and because of this moving history, you can still discover many little curiosities here in the border region today. But that's not all. The Suwałki Gap is also repeatedly mentioned in a military context, at least since the Russian war against Ukraine. The fear is that if Russia were to plan an attack on the Baltic states, it could first and foremost take place here. Russia and its ally Belarus could then attempt to occupy the Suwałki Gap in order to cut off Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia from the land route to their NATO partner Poland. This is not an invented scenario. The Belarusian ruler Lukashenko has already threatened to do just that and even held an military exercise to simulate this exact scenario. Some people therefore call the Suwałki Gap the most dangerous border area in the EU.
Today we're going on a little tour through this unusual but also quite tricky border area. What curiosities and relics from the past can still be found here along the border fences, and can you actually feel this threat everybody's talking about? Well, let's find out. Okay, boys and girls, here we are. Welcome to the Suwałki Gap. Yeah, I know it doesn't look that spectacular, but it's very interesting if we take a look on the map. The place I am right now is near a Lithuanian town called Lazdijai, and that's basically in the middle of the Suwałki Gap. On the one side we have Russia, Kaliningrad, on the other side we have Belarus, and this town is basically in the middle. But that's not the only thing that's special about this place. The place I am right now is also Polish-Lithuanian borderland, which is today not that spectacular anymore because both countries are EU countries. You can just cross the border several times a day if you want. But as you might know, this hasn't always been the case, and here in this forest we can still see some relics of that.
Yeah, the place you see right here is what some people call the real Iron Curtain. This is the former border fence between the former Polish People's Republic and the former Soviet Union. As you might know, Lithuania belonged to the UdSSR, the Soviet Union, for many decades. Involuntarily, it must be said, like all the other Baltic states, the country was annexed. And over the years, there has always been resistance to this and efforts to achieve independence. Lithuania was also the first country to declare its independence from the Soviet Union on the 11th of March 1990. On the other side of the fence, the Polish People's Republic. This was also a socialist country at that time and had close ties with the Soviet Union, but it was not part of the Soviet Union. And that's exactly why there was a hard border here at that time. In addition to this barbed wire fence, there were many sensors, watchtowers, sand strips for securing evidence, and a mobile field telephone attached to a tree every 200 meters. And there was also a large buffer zone at the border. If we look at the map today, we can see this is not the exact border strip between Lithuania and Poland, it's just beyond it. But this place right here is where the fence already began. Well, and if we walk a few meters to the end of this border fence, we will also find a sign here with some additional information about it. Unfortunately, it's only in Lithuanian, not in English, but I translated it for you. The sign basically explains why the border was so tightly secured back then. The Soviet Union was simply afraid that its citizens would flee to the Free West via Poland. That's why the first border guard posts were set up immediately after the war. People who lived here in the area were expelled within a radius of 1 kilometer. The whole process took only 2 days and no compensation was paid. Over the years, the border was continually reinforced, especially from 1980 onwards, when the Solidarność movement emerged in Poland, the harbinger of the upheaval in Poland. The Soviets erected a border system that was very modern for the time, with these T-shaped poles that we can still see here today. Also, a road was built next to this fence so that the border soldiers and emergency services could get there quickly. This is also the road I have just crossed. And well, this Iron Curtain was not completely dismantled until 2004, when Lithuania finally became a member of the European Union. And that actually brings us back to the present. Lithuania today has completely detached itself from its Soviet past. Today, it is one of the countries with the highest approval ratings for the European Union. And Lithuania warned against Russia and the activities of its president, Vladimir Putin, long before many other countries did. People here know what it's like to be annexed and lose your freedom, even if not much reminds of it today, except this little piece of border fence in the middle of nowhere.
So, if you're searching for a place where you're absolutely alone for hours, this could be the perfect place for you, because there is absolutely nobody here. I'm the only person for like an hour or something, and there are not even cars on the roads. So obviously absolutely nobody is interested in the Polish-Lithuanian border situation. Maybe that has also something to do with this border fence right here, because it's just symbolic today. It has absolutely no meaning anymore. It's just here for historical reasons. However, in other villages and towns, the situation even today is quite different. And that's where we're going next.
Du hast das Ziel erreicht.
Okay, here we are. Welcome to Sturkowo. Is that the right pronunciation? I'm not really sure. I will Google that once again later. This is a small Polish village, and in this village we will find a border fence that is no fun at all. Because this little village is right next to the Russian exclave Kaliningrad. And I actually wanted to do this introduction right in front of the border fence, but that is actually quite complicated.
Yeah, I just walked a few meters into this village and was immediately intercepted by the Polish border guards. Yeah, that's no joke. I then had to show all sorts of documents, ID, press pass, vehicle documents, and so on and so forth. Then they spoke like 10 minutes or something on the telephone, and then I was finally allowed to enter this village. However, I was told not to film the border fence. More on that later. First, let's take a look at the village itself. If you do that, you get the feeling that time has stood still here. It looks a bit like an old farming village that you can see in old movies or something. A bit quirky, but also like a totally intact world. The whole street is made of cobblestones. There are lots of old houses and farms along the way. Lots of stork nests too. Take a look here. People have kept their gardens beautifully tended. I've also seen children playing in the streets like in an Astrid Lindgren film. But if you keep going, at some point you will see this sign right here. And just a few meters behind this sign, you will come across this heavily secured border fence. Of course, I had to think about what I can actually show you of this border fence in my video, and I decided to show you this picture here of the border. You can see this picture was taken from a safe distance, and the border fence itself is also anything but secret. There are current agency and media pictures of it, also detailed YouTube videos where people walk along the border fence and film everything. So it would be nonsense not to show you any of it. But what I, of course, haven't done is stand right in front this border fence and film it. And there is a reason for it. Since last year, there has been a paragraph in the Polish Homeland Security Act that prohibits filming and photographing strategic objects. Anyone who violates this law must expect a fine and arrest, as well as the confiscation of their recording devices. I assume that's also what the officers were referring to when they talked to me. I'm not 100% sure because they didn't speak English very well, but in any case, they circled around me several times in their vehicle as I was walking around here, so I just couldn't take any recordings of this fence. There is one thing I should mention in this context. As a journalist, of course, I could have registered here in advance to get a filming permit. That's actually what you do if you want to film like private property or something. But to be honest, I didn't actually expect to be intercepted here immediately when I was walking into the town. This is a public place, a village, and I was actually a little surprised that the situation here was so tense. However, what I could do is to take a look at this border, at least with my own eyes, and I can tell you it actually looks quite impressive. There is a thick barbed wire fence. There are also some kind of anti-tank barriers, I think. And above all, there are lots of cameras that are sure to see everything that happens here at the border, and that also see what I'm doing here. And that is particularly interesting when you consider that the border fence once looked like this. This is a Google Street View image from 2012, where the only thing that looks like a border is this barrier here. And behind it, there's just a small fence, like you see it on meadows or something for cows. And well, today this border looks like this. Just a little side note before I leave this village again. Of course, I also tried to talk to a few residents of this place, which was a bit complicated because they don't want it to be filmed. And there was also a language barrier because I don't speak Polish and many of them didn't really speak English or German, especially the older people. However, I was able to have at least some little conversations with some of them. And what I took away from these conversations is that life here on the border is quite complicated, obviously. I'm not really sure if people are afraid of Russia that's just 2 meters behind their village. But there was one older man who really warned me several times not to go to the border fence. And even though there was this language barrier, he mentioned the word "the Russians" several times. And then he made a hand gesture that was meant to indicate that bombs were falling. So I'm not really sure if people are afraid of this border over here. But what I can say is, it seems to play a quite important role in their everyday life.
So, what I don't want to do today is to tell you just about the life at the border fence, even though it's interesting, I know. I also want to give you some historical context why this border fence in this village is actually here. And this also comes with the question, why is there even a little part of Russia, a Russian exclave, within the European Union? Well, to answer this question, we have to go a bit back in time, and one thing I can already promise, this little village right here also plays a quite important role in this story.
The history of the Kaliningrad exclave is long and complex, so I will abbreviate it a little, but roughly speaking, it was like this. In the Middle Ages, the area is mainly inhabited by members of the Baltic Prussian people. In 1231, however, German knights begin their conquest of the region. By 1255, a castle called Königsberg rises on the site of today's Kaliningrad. Over time, the city of Königsberg grows, becoming the capital of the Duchy of Prussia in 1525 and later joining the German Empire. Everything changes with the Second World War. At first, Königsberg remains largely untouched due to its remote location, but in 1944, British air raids devastate the city. A year later, also the German forces in the region surrender. Already throughout the war, discussions of Königsberg's fate emerge. Poland, being next door, seems the most likely candidate to inherit the territory. In fact, as early as 1941, Stalin also suggests to British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden that all of East Prussia should be handed over to Poland. However, a little later, Stalin changes his mind. He no longer wants all of East Prussia to go to Poland. He sets his sights on northern East Prussia, including Tilsit and Königsberg, for the Soviet Union. His reasoning, Stalin argues that the Soviet Union needs an ice-free Baltic harbor during the winter. But many historians believe Stalin also wanted to have this land as a symbolic trophy. At the Potsdam Conference in 1945, after Nazi Germany's defeat, the Allies agree on the Soviet annexation of northern East Prussia, and so it happens. Königsberg becomes Kaliningrad.
At this time, also a new border is created, which brings us back to our little village here.
As you can see on the map, the border between Poland and Kaliningrad is a fairly meticulously drawn straight line through the landscape. Only here and there are small bumps in this line, such as right here in our little village Sturkowo, which in the past used to be called Schönbruch.
There is a reason for this little bump in the map, because our little village here was actually divided when the border was redrawn. There used to be a church tower in this village, and the Soviets wanted to have it as an observation point. So the church tower, including one part of the village, became what is today Russia, and the other part of the village became Polish.
Today, however, there is not much left of the Russian side of the village. Firstly, nobody lives there anymore, and the church tower was also demolished in the 1970s. So the only relic of this place is the southern side here in Poland. Well, since this state border was drawn here in the region after the Second World War, life here in the area was as unrelaxed as it was near Lestye, where we were before. Also here, the area between Russia and Poland was kind of an additional iron curtain. There was no border crossing at all, no contact, nothing. However, the situation became much more relaxed from 1990 onwards, when Kaliningrad opened its first border crossings. In the years that followed, there was lively border traffic and also trade flourished, and the exclave of Kaliningrad also loosened its dependence on Moscow, at least a little over the years.
But especially from 2004 onwards, the situation in the border region became quite complicated. In that year, Poland and also Lithuania joined the European Union, and Lithuania at that time also the defense alliance NATO. Poland was already a member for a few years at that time. That also changed the life in the border region, not only in this village, but also at other places, and that's where we're going next. Okay, we're back in the Suwałki Gap. To be precise, in a small Lithuanian village called Vistytis. And you might already see it right behind me. Also, this village lies right next to the Russian border. And it's actually also torn by the Russian border. But in this case, the situation is even more complicated.
The redrawing of the border here in Vistytis only took place 20 years ago, in 2004. Lithuania and Russia negotiated for 14 years and then moved the border in the village about 100 meters to the west. This means that these houses here on the left-hand side used to be in Russia, but now they are Lithuanian. In return, Russia received an equally large but uninhabited piece of land as compensation from Lithuania. There was also a border change here in the neighboring lake. In the past, the border used to run almost directly along the shore, so you were not allowed to go into the water from the Lithuanian side. With the new rule from 2004, it was moved a little into the lake. 525 hectares of water were leased to Lithuania for at least 49 years. The reason for all these changes is relatively banal. Both countries just wanted to make the border simpler so it would be easier to control. This was also quite important for Lithuania's accession to the EU. Another change was also made here with the new border. The small border traffic that was still possible here in the village at that time, at exactly this place right here, was discontinued with the new regulations and Lithuania's accession to the EU. This means that this road you see here became a dead end, and people who used to be direct neighbors were now completely separated from each other. Since then, anyone who wanted to drive to the other side of the border had to use the nearest official border crossing, which is in the town of Kybartai. And that means in total a car ride of more than 1 hour, plus border controls, buying a visa and stuff like that.
Hört ihr das? Das ist Alarm. Ich weiß nicht, ob wegen mir Alarm ist. Muss ja. Sonst ist ja hier nichts. Ich würde sagen, wir provozieren das jetzt mal nicht. Wir gehen jetzt wieder zurück. Ich habe jetzt wirklich keinen Bock auf Stress so spät am Abend. Komm, wir gehen wieder zurück. Ja, ist gut. Kannst Alarm ausmachen. Ich gehe schon.
Yeah, as you can see, it's a really strange feeling to walk around here. It somehow feels like you're standing at the end of the world or something, except that behind this end of the world, there's still life going on there. You can hear people on the other side of this fence. There is an excavator driver who's still excavating things there late in the evening. Also, the Russian coast guards drive across this lake over and over again, laughing and shouting. But even though these people are only 50 to 100 meters away from me, I can't interact with them because there is this huge, heavily secured fence between them and me. What is also bizarre is that all these relics from the past can still be seen here. There is this abandoned house on the left that apparently used to be part of the old border facility. And then there is still a town exit sign and a town entrance sign here, as if there is still some kind of hope that this road would be reopened again at some point in the future. But everyone knows that this probably won't happen anytime soon.
Och, jetzt ist hier ein Wauwau. Er interessiert sich aber überhaupt nicht für mich und er hat keinen Schwanz mehr. Weiß nicht. Gut, auch interessant. Hi, Mizi. Well, the separation of this village, Vistitis, happened 20 years ago. 10 years after that, Russia annexed Crimea in the Ukraine, and the security here at the border was heavily increased. And then, 2022, you know it, Russia invaded Ukraine, and since that day, nothing is like before here in this border region. And we can also see that at our next and last place I want to show you today. I just arrived at the border triangle between Poland, Lithuania and Russia. This border triangle a few years ago used to be some kind of a tourist gag. I don't know if that's the right word, because on this triangle there is a huge pillar and you were not allowed to run around this pillar. Of course, as an EU citizen you could jump from Poland to Lithuania and back, but you were not allowed to run around this pillar because then you would have been in Russia, and that's not allowed without a visa. Well, today running around this pillar is not even possible anymore. Let's go to the border, I will show you.
Yeah, compared to the villages I visited, the situation here is a bit more relaxed. There are still signposts leading to the border triangle, and I even came across some tourists and cyclists. The border triangle itself, however, looks very different today than it did a few years ago. This is the pillar I was just talking about. It used to be an absolute tourist hotspot. Today, completely fenced in by barbed wire. I'm on the Polish side right now. On the right side, there is Lithuania, and straight ahead, behind this pillar, this is Russia. This is the area that you, of course, were also not allowed to enter in the past, but today you literally can no longer do that. There are pictures on the internet that show quite clearly how this border has been increasingly secured over the years. First, there was just this pillar, then at some point these barriers were added right next to the pillar. Well, and today this point is so tightly secured that everything is screaming, stay away from here. Here too, cameras everywhere, loudspeakers, big warning signs, a really uncomfortable place. There is no other way to put it. Yeah, I have to say it's a weird feeling to walk around here along the border. It feels quite depressing, and you can also feel some kind of a threat. I don't know if that's the right word, but everybody I'm talking to here in the border region is a bit nervous about the whole situation. And well, the recent events also show that this is not just a feeling. Shortly after the annexation of Crimea in the Ukraine in 2014, Russia repeatedly holds a series of large military maneuvers on the borders with the NATO states. And 2 years later, in 2016, one announcement in particular startled the countries. In that year, Russia transfers nuclear-capable short-range missiles to Kaliningrad. These have a range of 700 kilometers. Russia claims that these are only missiles transported for training purposes. 1 year later, in 2017, NATO stations new soldiers in the Baltic states and Poland. A few years later, dramatic scenes repeatedly unfold on the other side, on the border with Belarus. Hundreds of refugees are stranded at the border fences of the Baltic states and Poland. It is assumed that Russia and Belarus have deliberately lured them into the country with false promises and then directed them to the borders. This is also known as hybrid warfare, because Russia and Belarus know that the migration issue divides people in the EU, so they use people to set things on fire. The provocation continues with Russia's war against Ukraine. In towns bordering Lithuania, the letter Z is painted on walls of houses, the propaganda symbol for Russia's war. At some point, both Poland and Lithuania begin to massively tighten their borders and fences, as you just have seen in my video. In addition, several border crossings are closed and also entry bans are imposed. In September 2022, Lithuania imposes an entry ban on Russian tourists, and also all other Baltic states close their borders to vehicles registered in Russia. The latest news in this regard came just a few weeks ago, shortly after I finished filming my video. Lithuania announced that it will secure its bridges to Kaliningrad even more tightly with tank traps and, if necessary, demolish them if the security situation requires it. If the enemy intervenes, Lithuania says, it will be destroyed immediately. But even though this whole situation here in the border area sounds quite threatening now, one thing must be mentioned. The risk in the Suwałki Gap from an attack, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video, has been minimized at least a little bit in recent months. And the reason for this are those two countries over here, Sweden and Finland. They are now members of NATO, which means that also most of the Baltic Sea belongs to NATO member states. This means that Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia now have a lot more backing if an attack actually occurs, and help from the water will be there very quickly. Military experts assume that Russia would not be able to prevent the arrival of Western reinforcements by sea, and Russia will certainly also think twice whether it really wants to take this risk. At least that's some reassuring news at the end of this road trip, but the situation here in the Suwałki Gap remains tense, and it will probably continue to be so. So, that was my video about the Suwałki Gap. As you can see, I'm back in the holiday house. Yeah, I booked a holiday house on the Lithuanian side, right next to the Russian border, right at the lake we just saw in my video. The lake is right in front of my window. And the house owner just brought me a meal with some fish from this border lake. I don't know if it was Russian fish or Lithuanian fish. I think the fish also doesn't really care anymore, at least. Yeah, but enough talking. That was my video about the Suwałki Gap. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. If you did, then please leave a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. And if you'd like to support me and my work, you can also do that, for example, on Patreon. There's a link down in the description, or you can become a channel member on my YouTube channel. Then you will also get some exclusive stuff. For example, I will tell you all the addresses of the places I showed you today. And maybe also some holiday house tips. I think that's a good idea, right? Yeah, if you want to know all that, you should become a Patreon or a channel member. Yeah, that's it for today. And if you thought there's something missing in this video, yeah, in fact it is, because I haven't visited the other side of the Suwałki Gap yet, the side where Belarus is. And yeah, maybe another video will follow soon on this YouTube channel, so you should subscribe. That's it for today. Have a safe journey. See you next time. Bye bye.